Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So, Cap, the book we're going to discuss, The Innovator's Dilemma, When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail, is key in understanding why well-managed, established companies fail despite their best efforts to innovate their products. So in this episode, we'll discuss key points of the book, how these factors affected established large companies in the past, where most of those companies also had a dominant product or position in the market, how these points relate to companies today, especially if you're looking at joining a company, and how it might affect their leadership position and why you as an individual might care.
Mark, great to have you. Thanks for coming back. You're a beast. If you don't mind, I find this read is kind of an oldie but a goodie, but I think it's so relevant right now. I think if you take a couple of principles in the book, let's just start off with talking about the differences between disruptive and sustaining. So the book talks about those two product innovations in disruptive and sustaining. Can you kind of kick us off a little bit with what's the difference?
Yeah. No, this is great, guys. I'm really glad that we get to go back to the archives on this one. And I'm hoping that for the audience, this is going to be like one of those either entry into a great therapy session or an entry into a great sales call.
Yeah.
Because I think they're both the same, honestly.
Yeah.
I always tell my students, okay, I think John McMahon might have educated me on this one originally, but I just think therapists are the best analog for just great salespersonship, because you walk into a therapy session, you're bummed out, you walk out, you're friggin' jazzed about life, and all they did was ask you 8 questions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane.
They never give you an answer.
Right. And I feel like I'm hoping today that everyone's listen, it's why Innovator's Dilemma? Why are we talking about this? And I'm hoping at the end of this episode, you're going to be holy cow. This is crazy. And, so I just want to back up a second and just set the stage on that book of Clayton Christensen. Not only did I get to sit in the classroom at MIT and hear him lecture, not only did I get to pass him in the faculty lounge at Harvard as a peer, saying as humbly as possible, and thank him for how impactful his work to the success of HubSpot was. But now today, we get to go back to that work on the brink of AI.
Yeah.
Not only, I have so much conviction that it's going to be the biggest technological change in the history of B2B software. I also think it's going to be the biggest disruption to society on the brink of when we formed civilizations, when we formed feuds and kings and queens, and when we invented democracy. And we don't have time to get into that, but I think that's we're on the brink of. And when we assess the B2B software ecosystem and what companies we decide to start, what strategies we pursue, what companies we decide to join as a leader, and how we form our strategies as an incumbent defender, this work is pivotal. And so, John, to your question, Innovator's Dilemma, let me just, you're talking about sustained innovation versus disruptive innovation. And I think we're coming out, let's focus most of our energy on the B2B software ecosystem, because that's where your audience is. I think the last 25 years has largely been about sustaining innovation. It hasn't been about a disruption. And that's what makes this work so important right now, because the majority of founders, the majority of investors, and the majority of company executives were either in 22-year-old entry-level positions in the last disruption or in diapers. So it's really, now you guys weren't, and that's why I'm excited to learn from you two and your career progressions on this. But we got to get out of the mindset that you learned between 2010 and 2020.
Yeah.
Because it's most of it's not relevant. Because
Right.
we were in a sustaining innovation realm, which was basically like, cool, we have an awesome product. We have product market fit. We have a very defined customer base. We have a very defined mission for what our business does and the problems it solves. And we're just going to listen to customers and add, and create enterprise value. That's you follow that, you're going to be bankrupt in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's freaking crazy. And so, like, you know, true disruptive innovation changes that game. And I'll share some data with you because I think throughout this episode, we're going to draw an analog between what happened in the year 2000 as we moved from on-prem to cloud, and now as we move to cloud to AI. Here's some facts. The market leader at that time in HR tech was PeopleSoft. Today,
You're
it's
talking
Workday.
about when the emergence of the internet at the time.
Year 2000.
Yep.
The market leader for HR software was PeopleSoft.
Mhm.
Today, it's Workday. Workday wasn't even invented then. The market leader in CRM was Siebel. Today, it's Salesforce. Salesforce was a year old then, and no one had heard of them. The market leader, one that you're going to talk about, John, in IT, was BMC. Today, it's ServiceNow. ServiceNow wasn't invented yet.
Right.
The market leader in, you know, ERP was SAP. Today, it's arguably it's NetSuite. NetSuite wasn't invented yet. Okay, so there's some facts. And then another fact was, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's roughly, if you added up the enterprise value of public's B2B software companies in the year 2000, it was about 300 billion. Today, it's 800 billion. So it grew by 500. 80% of that growth was captured by cloud companies that were not invented in the year 2000. So if you're sitting around thinking like, oh yeah, this AI movement's crazy and all the big existing companies are going to capture it, history suggests otherwise.
Right.
And that's why this episode and this book is critical, because that would be my underlying definition of a disruptive technology, is when the market growth and category leadership changes hands. That's what we're on the brink of.
Yeah, it's going to happen again for sure. Just like it happened when we moved from mainframes to the desktop, when we moved with the emergence of the internet, then the cloud, and now AI. It's going to set a whole bunch of new companies that are going to displace the market leaders for sure.
Exactly.
And what you're saying is essentially since 2010 till now, we basically have been doing sustaining engineering, meaning N+1. We take a product, we make it a little bit better, and we put it on the market. Hasn't really
Exactly.
been super disruptive products.
Product managers go out, do the research, they talk to customer success. What are the customers asking for? Why are people churning? Why are people expanding? They talk to the sales team. Why are we close wanting? Why are we close losting? They look at the competitive landscape and they iterate, and it defends their position and grows it. You
Right.
do that, you're probably dead in 10 years.
But then it was in the emergence of the cloud where we really did see a lot of disruptive companies, like a Snowflake disrupting the entire data warehouse market.
So many that you will both live through.
But what I want to kind of set the tone on is, with all that data, and I bet you take every single example, there was somebody living in that time that was trying to do something or had an idea and it didn't work out, or they always had the idea and then they left and kind of built it on their own. When I look at all those examples, I bet you that there was some point in time where an idea floated through the sustainer and a disruptor had to come along and take it with passion or conviction or what have you. I lived it at Xerox. You read the book, The Prophets in the Dark, and it's not profit with an F, it's profit with PH. And you look at the massive amount of innovation that came out of Palo Alto and their facility there, and it just created massive new technology. So one of the things I want to just kind of focus on as we go through here today is, those whispers. Because I'm dealing with it at Force Management. There's whispers in the night. And, sometimes they get captured and sometimes they get released. And so as we go through this a little bit, I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to speak to people and say, how do you capture the whisper? And, you don't just have to be the person working in your garage that just came out of college. You could get the whisper. How do you know what to do with the whisper? Does that make sense?
Totally. And it's so hard, John. And I think like we both can tell stories to maybe help set that tone, John, of why it even happened, so people can relate. Like that's happening in my boardroom right now.
Yep.
And I like, we had a flavor of it at HubSpot. I can certainly talk to it. And I was deeply entrenched in the movement into the CRM. It was probably a little bit more it contributed to this disruption. And I think it could be a blueprint for how to do it. But I'll kind of like speak from the distance a bit on the overall CRM disruption that was more like the Siebel to Salesforce transition. And maybe you guys can talk about other ones, maybe BMC, John, but like, I had the luxury of interviewing for our keynote at our West Coast LP meeting in the fall, David Schmeier, who was he's currently chief product officer at Salesforce. And we had the meeting in Salesforce Tower, so it was very appropriate. Now, what was even really more cool about that was he was also the co-founder of Siebel with Tom Siebel. So he had a pretty good inside view on what was going on. Now, he didn't say this, he didn't disclose exactly, but in that conversation with him, it seemed like it went something like this. The year is 1995. Siebel's crushing it and printing money. They and Act own 80% of the CRM market. And I'm sure someone was like, hey, there's this thing called the internet that Al Gore invented 40 years ago that's starting to become mainstream. Yeah, right. Should we do something about it? And like, I don't know. I think so. It seems like it's a big deal. So they hire McKinsey, and McKinsey goes out and does a huge assessment. They talk to 500 CTOs in software, and they come back and say, here's our findings. Every single CTO said they will never, ever put their data in the cloud. So we don't think there's actually a big opportunity for you. Number two, we evaluated the investment required to take your on-premise software product and move it into the cloud. And it's like $1 billion. And furthermore, these cloud players are starting to play around with this stupid idea called subscription pricing, which would absolutely kill your business model. So why would you ever do this? And to your point, John Kaplan, a young gentleman at Oracle resigns named Mark Benioff and starts Salesforce.com.
Yeah.
And thinks, hey, maybe there is something here. And he builds a cloud first. And you remember the first Salesforce logo, it was the word software with a red X through it.
Yeah.
That was their mission. And, to your all research point and the work of Clayton Christensen, he didn't go try to sell like Genzyme and GE. He sold little companies who didn't care. They were willing to take the risk.
I think he called it. Didn't he call it
exactly.
Poor Man's CRM? Yeah.
Exactly. Poor Man's CRM. And like, hey, you all don't have a CRM because you can't afford 100, servers in your net. And he printed money there. And then finally in 2002 and 2003, when the head of IT at Genzyme and GE was like, hey, we're going to get left behind if we don't move to the cloud and figure this out, he was there to catch it, and Siebel was not. And the list goes on, whether we look at, HR, software, finance, and John, you lived through the IT version of it, John McMahon.
Yeah. So there lies the innovator's dilemma. They're caught in a business model, like you said, when they have to move from, let's say, perpetual software to subscription software. They're caught where they mainly pay attention to their install-based customers, and they do, what we refer to as sustaining engineering. And they don't really have any people inside the company that really want to, generate a disruptive technology, on part of the company, because the political base gets in the way, the power base gets in the way and kind of shuts them down.
Exactly. I mean, looking back, it's easy to say, like, let's just stay on the CRM thing, because I think a lot of your audience is in like sales and go-to-market leadership, so they relate to the tech stack. And like, we look at like what happened to CRM as we went through the social and mobile movements. Not a whole lot. Like the mobile movement. Okay, I'm using Salesforce. Oh, now mobile is a big deal. Fine. We built the mobile interface. This is not an innovator's dilemma. It's not a disruptive technology. It's a sustaining technology.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure there was a mobile first CRM. I'm sure that was invested in for like tens of millions of dollars. It went south, right? But like when you're Siebel and you're like, and we know the right answer right now. It was like, take your on-prem and move to cloud infrastructure. A lot of investment, hard to do. Take your big upfront contracts and turn them into small monthly payments. Friggin' impossible to do. Take your really expensive, good-looking sales team that knows how to golf and take someone to a steak dinner and close $1 million deal and turn them into an inside seller selling transactions, making half as much money. Impossible to do. The path from a ground up startup like Salesforce at the time to get to the right answer is so much faster and easier than someone moving. And the reason why it's relevant today is the promise of AI is to get rid of the people, to get rid of the salespeople. And when you look at today's sales tech big players, their entire business model is based on charging per person. How the hell are they going to survive in a world where the number of salespeople at a company is declining? Innovator's dilemma.
Now,
this is where it starts.
You also look at, I think about Snowflake, where at the time when Snowflake emerged, it was all these physical data warehouses, meaning you were constrained by how much storage you bought and how much compute power you bought. And the companies that sold those, like Oracle, Teradata, Greenplum, Netezza, they all took their revenue up front. When they sold the perpetual software license and they sold the hardware, they took the revenue as soon as they shipped that order. Then along comes Snowflake. It's in the cloud, and the pricing's based on consumption, meaning that they only get paid when companies utilize the product. So there's a huge discrepancy in the financial models. So if you're the CFO of the incumbent company, how are you going to possibly manage, revenue and profitability discussion with Wall Street if you're trying to quickly move from perpetual, to consumption? And then how do you move the entire company engineering-wise to do that also? You're going to displace so many people's jobs internally. It's just almost a nightmare. And that's why, a lot of these established companies never come up with the disruptive technology.
Yeah, it's just perfect, the same pattern, right? It's like changing. This is the on-prem to cloud. The move to subscription pricing, same thing. We're talking about Salesforce or HubSpot or Snowflake or whatever. The move to like people process, like distribution, engineering, to your point, John, and the actual physical architecture of not being a client server model, but like cloud-based. Like you could not catch it, but they're going to be different for AI. But I think like to Cap's opening question, like, so now looking back, John, on the Snowflake situation that you lived through and did well with, and let's say you instead were in Netezza or IBM's boardroom in 2002, how could they have defended themselves?
The only way you can do is go out and look for a small startup that has a disruptive technology similar to what Snowflake had. It's the only way you can fight back.
Before we go there on the technology piece, and I agree with you, John, but I'm on this Whispers thing because I lived through PTC.
Yes.
And PTC SolidWorks became a disruptor for PTC. And I just want to talk about this one point that's got me really revved up right now. It wasn't a whisper, guys. It was echoing in the hallways. If you're an outside-in company or an inside-out company, what I mean by that is if you're close to your customers and customer-centric, which everybody says that they are, you're going to be hearing not only whispers, you're going to be hearing, real data. You're going to be seeing real data. And I think some companies, I love PTC. It was unbelievable for me. I love Xerox. It was unbelievable for me. But, every great company has its disadvantages, and most of them, they didn't listen to the whispers. And here's why, I think. Because when you have this sustaining differentiation, you get emotionally connected to that sustaining differentiation. When you start leading a market, you believe that your innovation is what customers need. And so it's like the difference today versus back then. You can't create stuff today and hope people like it. It's got to be outside in. It's got to be based upon what the customer needs. And I think now more than ever, kind of this inside out approach versus an outside in approach, you die if you have an inside out approach. If you have an outside in approach, you're hearing what customers, and all these examples you guys are using, Snowflake, Xerox, SolidWorks and PTC, Salesforce.com. There was a need from a customer because of some things that were happening in the marketplace. And the closer you are to listening, is you can capitalize on it. But I understand why it's hard, Mark, because if you don't have the attitude of part of our vision has to be listening, and if you don't resource and spend on the listening, then you're screwed. And most companies aren't set up to do that right now, like you said in the opening of this thing.
Sometimes they are listening. So classic example, I was at Blade Logic. We got acquired by BMC. BMC at the time was the leader in the IT service management space. And then ServiceNow started to emerge. So it was no secret. They were gaining a lot of momentum. And BMC had an opportunity to buy ServiceNow. And I remember the pricing. You'd laugh if you heard the price at the time. But internal BMC engineering convinced the CEO.
This is what I'm talking about, John.
We can build the product ourselves, right? So
that's what I'm talking about. It's the emotional connection to we know better.
We know better, right?
At PTC, the emotional connection was that's a crap product. That's not as high quality as ours. And Mark, what I need you to talk about is a lot of this technology that becomes disruptive. It doesn't start off from a quality perspective. And that just blows people, especially in technology, that blows people's minds. It blew our mind at PTC because we totally discounted SolidWorks. They were 80. Their go-to-market was we're 80%. We have 80% of the functionality at PTC at 20% of the price, and we poo-pooed that. We were like, nobody's going to take them seriously. Well, they did.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of what you're saying, both of you, resonates with me. I can say in another way that might be happening in the boardroom too is, your inside out versus outside in, Cap. Like another way I hear that is the minute that you think about what to do about this disruption and you say, well, how can we leverage what we've already built? Game over.
That's right.
What can we leverage what we already have? How can we leverage the people we have? How can we leverage the brand that we have? How can we leverage the assets we have? Game over.
And when you mean game over, you're saying that's the wrong way to think about it.
We have to ignore it. We have to, your point, Cap, you got to say, okay, there's an AI thing. We have to go through this. We have to look at it not like this is our customer base, this is our product, this is our in staffing, and this is our pricing model. How do we use that to exploit AI? Instead, we have to say, let's say we quit this company and started one from scratch, knowing what we know about this segment. What does that look like? And then how do we get to that answer using what we have? And that's hard. But you got to start there, Cap, to your point.
It's funny you're saying that you don't have the skill set, and the power base inside these big companies usually rules. And they usually fight against that type of disruption because they're in the power. They're making all the money. They got the titles. They're not going to give in very easily to some people that are going to go on the side and believe that they can go ahead and disrupt the company. So they fight it.
Because on the side means we got to start from scratch. It's not going to be right the first time. We got to learn. We got to, and an innovator is not at that point in time. They're like, it's quality on the turns. It is, so that for me is something that I think, and we're going to talk about that, I think, is really what happens with disruptors is they go after a different part of the market. I want to go back to something you said, Mark, on like reducing salespeople. I think that's what everybody is thinking. And I do believe that probably is going to be an outcome. However, for me, and I'm having a lot of, in the space that I'm in, I'm having more conversations with, AI companies than I've ever had, and than any other topic in 20 years of running force management. But I tell you one thing, very few of the companies that approach me are trying to understand, like, let's just take the seller for an example. There's very few that are looking at the process of what the seller is going through and trying to understand where are the areas of opportunity to solve that problem, but still be effective and efficient and interactive with everything else that seller has going on. And this is a big problem in AI that I see right now in the sales deck. No companies are going to sign up for multiple applications and expand the tech seller deck. They're just, I don't have anybody telling me they're going to do that. But yet all these innovators on the disruptive side, they're picking a task and they're automating it, and they're completely losing sight of the full motion of a customer experience. Does that resonate for you, Mark?
Totally. It's the word Copilot. Copilot is the pets.com of this era.
Yeah.
Like, it's such an iteration. And it's like, and this is right out of what we're talking about with Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. The first phase, and it's like, not in the standard book, but how it's iterated. The first phase, we're in that like early S curve where it's hard because the market's not ready for what's coming and the technology's not ready either.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone tried to build Snowflake in 1998. Tech wasn't ready and market wasn't ready. So it's a really hard time. Like, what did get built in 1998? We dialed up through AOL. We brought up a Netscape browser and we did a search through Alta Vista.
Yeah.
That's what OpenAI is. That's what Jasper is. That's what those companies all went under or like didn't do well.
Yeah.
Like it was the next folks that took it. That's where we are because we're just iterative. We can't conceptualize Salesforce, Uber, Snowflake, Twilio. We can't yet.
Yes.
And so that's why all these people doing Copilot, they're like you're saying, Cap, this little task. And so like I just think the entrepreneurs, like 99% of it's just like not iterative. It's all going to go to zero because they're the AOLs. And the current big companies, I know why they're doing it. They're doing Copilot because they're focused on next quarterly's earnings. And that's where it is.
That's
like
plus one. It's not
the
really
current companies. Yeah, they just want to make their existing staff more productive. That's like
just in case our listeners, when you say Copilot, talk about what you mean by that.
Yeah, just if you're an engineer, how do you have an AI assistant to make you 20% more productive? If you're a salesperson, how do you have this like AI assistant locked in to make you 20% more productive?
Yep.
If you work in finance, how do you have this AI assistant to make you generate the reports 20% faster? But like what AI is it's about the first $1 billion market cap company with 2 employees. Like it's and I'm not saying like, I mean, of course there's this profound like societal issue there of like could that create a 50% unemployment rate and what does that do for capitalism and all that? And I'm not supportive of that, or do I look forward to that? But like I'm just saying, I'm trying to be a realist, and believe me, like the economists at Harvard have said that the same concerns occurred during the advent of mass production and during the advent of the personal computing movement. And what happened in both those situations is it changed jobs, but it created more jobs. I hope that happens.
Yeah.
But this one does run the risk, regardless of whether it creates massive unemployment or it changes the jobs. How we look at how an insurance company is staffed today is going to be dramatically different 5 years from now. I'm not sure the Hartford will capture that.
Yeah.
I don't think they can move fast enough to that world than if someone started an insurance company from the ground up, embracing what's available in AI. That's crazy.
But
So
just
name
stick
an
there for a second. Like, let's say you're in and we have no, little disclaimer, we have no affiliation with insurance. We have no affiliation with Hartford or any
We
other.
should leave those
company.
numbers out. I'll leave brands out. I'm sorry.
But
Make sure you cut that.
let's just stay with that for a
Yeah.
second. Say you are there. Like, what would you be doing if you're one of those big companies? Like, what should the conversations be? Like, because we can't just say we're sports management and it's just going to be too expensive. We can't do it. We can't, what should we be doing?
You have to disrupt yourself.
You
Like
have to
that's
disrupt
the path
yourself.
is like, and that's Clay's work. It's like, it's like you can't, if you're going to, and so few, like who did it from on-prem to cloud? Maybe Microsoft, and we have to study that one more closely. But like you have to disrupt yourself. And that's so painful because it probably means a tough couple of quarters of earnings. It probably means like massive changeovers in staff.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of questions as to whether you survive, massive questions as to whether you ruined a good thing. And that's fine. You can just like run it out as, some of these other companies did, or you can actually try to change, but you got to disrupt yourself.
So do you think it can be done for the innovator? You think
definitely. So I can like talk about,
Well,
I
like that,
go ahead, John.
Mark, you and I talked earlier about like if BMC did acquire ServiceNow, that you're not so sure they would have completely mitigated this disruption risk. You think maybe like another cloud attacker would have won. And that speaks to the mindset of these established companies. They may not have the right people to inside the company to disrupt themselves, or even when they acquire companies, and I've been acquired a couple of times, the technology and the sales force kind of gets lost in the bigger company.
And the
they never get the real value because that political base, they just don't have the mindset of a disruptor.
Exactly. Because to your point, Mac, it was like, yeah, fine. They could have bought a ServiceNow for what was today pennies on the dollar, which would have been amazing. However, even if they had done that, you would have guessed with some degree of confidence that they basically would have buried it. Like, oh, cool. We solved the problem. We took out the attacker. But that doesn't solve the problem. The problem is ultimately the market's going to want a cloud first business. And unless BMC becomes a cloud first business, then they don't survive. The number two comes up and takes them out. So what would have happened? This is really hard work that very few people did. And I hope they could perhaps get some inspiration in this AI movement is BMC buys, they could either buy ServiceNow or build their own. But bottom line is you need a cloud product. Okay. Right. And that could probably be something like, okay, you catch it early. So you take like a group of engineers and a very small cross-functional team, as if you're almost seed funding your own disruptor, and you get them the hell out of your office. Like if you're in Palo Alto, you move them to New York. You know what I mean? Like they get the hell out. Do not build this on our stack. Do not like the minute you're using anything at the company, you're slowing them down from the right answer. And so they have to build that thing and like, then you have to choose the market, like to Clay's, vision, like, with Salesforce, they chose a market that was greenfield for CRM to try this out. So you could do that. You could go and like find a market that won't be overly disruptive to you and a go-to-market motion that's ripe for that and that product. And now you've got this like additional revenue thing that's kind of hidden and very small. And then eventually you start getting pressure and it's like, oh, more and more they're asking for this. Your existing customers start asking for it. Yes. Well, now you have it there to catch it. And maybe that hotshot like enterprise rep in like New York quits. You don't backfill the territory with another hot shop enterprise reps. You backfill the territory with an inside, seller selling the cloud product. So it's incremental. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to conceptualize in that quick, but you disrupt yourself.
And what I like about what you said is like build or buy. And if you buy to bury, you can't afford to do that anymore. I don't think that exists anymore because like you said, innovation happens so fast. Number two is going to come up and just do what number one, if you took out number one, they're going to do it. The acquisition side, it's a graveyard full of people that totally underestimated what Johnny Mac was talking about with the political structure, the cultural structure. Just you have an innovator, they have a culture, they have political structure. What I see 99% of the time is all great intentions on an acquisition, and people just, they play out their earnouts or whatever they're doing, and then they're gone. And this one you're talking about is disrupting yourself and creating an environment to be able to go and take advantage of the whispers, get it totally away from your business, totally away from your thinking, is really, really interesting to me. But does it smell a little bit of, will you always have somebody over it that's going to be poo-pooing it? I mean, how would you really do that? You'd have to bring people in that just see the world differently.
Well, I mean, that's the problem, and that's the opportunity for entrepreneurship. You know, like if you listed out the Fortune 500 companies and the S&P 500 in 1960, I think like 75 of them are left on that list.
And maybe less.
And number one reason is that, Cap.
Yeah.
I think, you know? So yeah, now's the time to, you know, put your ego aside, you know, like, and embrace it.
The only company that I saw that acquired a disruptive technology and left them alone was when EMC picked up VMware.
Yeah, good point.
They left it completely alone. They let it continue to grow. In fact, it was basically, if I remember right, it was still a separate company when Dell came in to buy, you know, make the largest technology acquisition in history. I think it was what, $76 billion, where they picked up EMC and VMware at the same time. But they left that company alone, and it thrived.
That's a great point.
We should study that one. I mean, that's why I like to learn from the two of you all the time. And I have heard that EMC navigated that pretty well, and that I wonder if we looked at the nooks and crannies, because I did hear that whole like replacement territory that came from an individual that was at EMC at the time that wanted to write a Harvard Business School case about it. And I was like, that's brilliant. It's just like one step at a time. Like, don't replace the, you know, it just happens naturally. Like, territory turns over, don't replace it with the enterprise seller, and replace it with the inside seller. Now, you have to keep in mind, that was that movement. That is not AI. Like, to solve AI, you're not replacing, you know, like, okay, maybe you're replacing an inside rep with an AI rep. I don't know. I just don't think that's a fair. It's more the overarching thing is you disrupt yourself. And that's, John, to your point, Mac, that's to your point, like that's probably a good example.
Why that's a good example for me is if you look at like Billy Scanlon, you look at the leader of that EMC business stayed intact, and a lot of those teams stayed intact, and they, like, I wouldn't have guessed that was going to be the EMC Dell outcome. And whatever they did on the secret sauce, on the political and the on the execution piece, that's probably where Johnny Mac, that's probably where it laid on that one.
Yeah. I want to go back to what I've experienced the larger companies when I'm selling a brand new technology into bigger companies that have relationships with big companies like IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, those types of things. And when you're attacking one of their like products, what they do to defend themselves and buy themselves some time is they do what I call a wrap and roll.
Yeah.
So December 31st, you need to renew 10 different products with us. But there's this guy, John McMahon, and his sales force, they're attacking your company on product X. So, you know, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, all those big companies, they have a product X. So what they do is they know it's inferior. So what they do is they basically renew and give it away for free or discounted at like 95%, basically to keep us out of that account and keep us from growing our install base. So that's how I've seen bigger companies try to fend off, at least for the time being, disruptive technology.
But in any of those companies you were in, Johnny, that were attacking, did it work?
No, because we continued to grow. We would just go someplace else and continue to grow the business till eventually we got acquired or we went public.
But it's funny that we're saying this because you look at like the big ones, like the Microsoft, you know, I think on the wrap and roll that you talked about, I think that buys you time.
That's what it does, right?
But that chess piece has to be integral in the future.
Right.
It has to be. So if you look at Microsoft, like even back in the office days, like the brilliance of that's kind of where it started for me, is that people are still my dad, God rest his soul, he would tell me WordPerfect was the greatest. He was a writer. WordPerfect was the greatest, thing on the planet. And, this thing from Microsoft Word is such a joke. And I remember the difference in my thinking and my dad's thinking. I was like, Dad, but like they all go together. And this was the early days when they were trying to get that strategy of it all going together from an office perspective. I think that argument's always going to be there until the value of it all being together outweighs the advantages of the singular product's differentiation. Because there's still people that are arguing about that. Like even back in, what was the spreadsheet before Excel? What was everybody doing?
It was, what was that? Quick.
We can't even remember it, but it was.
I remember it because I used it.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's a very interesting narrative that you guys have going on. And to me, it's to bring it back to this conversation. It's another way of differentiating between sustaining technologies and disruptive, because I think what other people describe what you're saying, Mac, is bundling, the strategy of bundling, something that Microsoft, IBM, Salesforce have always done exceptionally well.
Totally.
And it's beautiful for sustaining. And it's actually the question that I ask our entrepreneurs that we evaluate that makes them turn white in the face is I literally asked it yesterday and they were like white in the face. I was like, okay, this is great idea. I can understand how you're attacking, big company X with this new product. But like, let's say you crush and you go from 0 to 5 to 15 to 30 over the next 3 years, they're going to notice. And they're going to basically, what if they say, hey, we're taking our 20 best engineers, we're going to put them in a room, and we're going to say, find out how to reverse engineer their product, and we're going to bundle it in. What are you going to do? How do you still win? Some of them have good answers because they actually built the defensible moat, but most of them don't. And that's a great strategy for the big companies, but it only works for a sustaining technology. Imagine if Siebel had tried to do that as their cloud answer. It's like, hey, like they kind of did. They were like, oh yeah, but we, we have our whole product. We now have an HTML interface.
Yeah.
That's not the answer. You know what I mean? And that's what it is in Copilot today. It's like, because the answer is the whole change. And like, that's what these big companies are trying to take a bundling, sustainable technology approach to a disruptive technology. And that, as you guys were talking, that's how I sort of framed that discussion.
Yeah. It's a great.
Would you say, or would you not say that HubSpot was a disruptive technology? Or how do you think about HubSpot?
I really think that it's a good question. I think for the most part, strategically within this framework, we exploited the SMB.
Yes.
Right. So like when we were first going out and raising capital in the first year, 2006, that was the biggest objection we got. I mean, there are hundreds of VCs that are kicking themselves for passing on the seed. And Larry Bond did the $5 million on $7 million valuation. That was a good investment.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, but the number one objection, like, wait, I don't get it. You're selling to SMB. Who's done that? We were like into it. Okay, fine. Who else? No one. But like few people could see that there were macro changes happening around with how the internet would change buyer behavior, to your original point, Cap, at the beginning of this episode, and how it would enable access to the SMB. Because up until that point, you could only sell software through an expensive salesperson, so you couldn't get the LTV to CAC math to work. But suddenly with the advent of the internet, you could distribute the software not through a bunch of servers, but through a monthly SaaS subscription. So it was much easier for folks to buy and brought the CAC way down. And because of that, now you've got, like, at the time it was WebEx that was ultimately, changed by GoToMeeting and then Zoom. But like, we were selling software over the phone. People were shocked that we were closing contracts without shaking someone's hand.
Yeah.
And we were generating demand through inbound leads.
Yeah.
So
but
it's
Mark,
like that,
wasn't
no
it
one could
also
see
that now at this point in time in history, technology was more affordable to the SMB? Whereas before it was so expensive to the SMB, they basically didn't utilize it. And with the advent of the internet, low cost laptops and desktops, there was an affordability that allowed you to sell into SMB also.
It was actually like that's the whole list. Like you didn't have to buy 100 servers and put it in your basement as a starting point of the cost. You just opened up a web browser. So that's huge. You didn't have to fork up $2 million up front with maintenance fees after. You paid $50 a month. So that was huge. You didn't have to pay as a vendor, at the time, whatever, $300,000 a year for a fancy enterprise rep. You could take a 23-year-old ex-football player and pay them $70,000 a year to sell over the phone. Delete that part, Rachel.
Well, so the parts that blowing me away is this commonality that keeps coming up on SMB. So when I think about innovators that are sustaining and that are poo-pooing any whispers because it's coming up through the SMB, would basically my stomach's telling me, look the heck out, because that's the playbook.
Well, that's where everyone starts.
Where everyone starts.
You don't have a fully functioning product yet. You don't have all the features and functions and bells and whistles that all the big companies have that you'd fight in more of the mid-sized to large companies. So
it's easier.
You have to play down there.
It's easier. Like I guess I'll say there are rare exceptions. SpaceX doesn't have an SMB play. Like there are some exceptions. So like, and that's okay. You can do that. But those are just hard. Like if you're like, I would say in general, like great advice for the common entrepreneur is they typically get obsessed with trying to close the big brand and think that everyone else will follow. And they completely underestimate that that's not going to happen. That's going to take them 18 months to get to a no, and it's going to put them under business. And the reason for that no is because of these weird objections like SOX compliance that they have no shot at getting at this early stage.
That's right.
Now, like, unless you're Elon Musk and can raise $100 million on a multi-billion-dollar valuation with no product and juice SpaceX, great. But for the most part, you're right. Start with the SMB for all those reasons and move your way up.
Now, Mark, what I think really differentiated HubSpot was they decided to stay in SMB for a really long period of time versus 99% of other startups start in SMB and they just can't wait. They're constantly trying to drive very quickly into the mid-size and the large companies. And having watched you guys, maybe I'm wrong, but you stayed in SMB for a pretty long period of time to basically build a sizable company in a defensive moat.
For sure. And that was like, I'll tell you, I'd be a little hesitant to take that away as a general entrepreneur, because I can tell you across the 50 companies we have on the stage 2 portfolio, the ones that have now hit, 15, 20, 25 million, for the most part, I'm like, let's go to the enterprise now. It's a great play. The economics are better. Like you're ready for it. You weren't ready for it 2 years. You're ready for it. And that's a good playbook. And in fact, I was arguing that at HubSpot, as was our CFO and our CMO and every single board member. The only 2 people that objected were Brian and Dharmesh, but they ran the company. Right. So that's what we decided to do. And they were right in the end.
I remember saying to Halligan, why don't you go up market? Said, why do I need to? And I think
what everyone does.
There were like 550,000 SMB companies. Why do I need to go up market? And I thought, wow, I had no idea there were that many.
In that example too, though, Mark, I give you huge credit. You guys were some of the pioneers on really leveraging that motion in the SMB. It wasn't like a stepping stone for you. You mastered that SMB space, the go-to-market, the conversations, the sales process. That was no small task. So
there were a number of unique elements of that, Cap, right? It's like, you're absolutely right. Like that was Brian and Dharmesh's argument is definite question number 1. Like it's basically you're in the marketing arena in SMB and do you sell marketing to the enterprise now, or do you go sideways, stay in the SMB and do sales?
You had the opposite dilemma, right?
It's more of like an expansion type case, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's saying, go stay in marketing, go to the enterprise. And here's a long list of reasons from Brian and Dharmesh. Number 1, it's getting really bloody up there. Like Oracle bought, what was it? Not Marketo, it was the other one. Well, like Marketo got bought by private equity and was like scaling up. Oracle
Pardot?
made a big purchase. Salesforce bought Pardot and
Yeah.
Exact Target. Adobe bought a player. Microsoft bought a player. They're all going to the enterprise. So it's going to be super bloody. Point number one. Point number two, it takes away all of our unique advantages. No other company can generate inbound leads at a low cost like us and navigate a transactional sales team to close businesses. We have no advantages with those assets upstream, right? And then the secret little one, I know Halligan's going to hate me on this one. He doesn't like to fly. He knew if we went in the enterprise, he'd have to be on airplanes all the time, going to shake hands. He's going to kill me on that one, Mac. Oh my God, you got to help me on that. But anyway, so we stayed and it was beautiful, because they were absolutely right. Like, stay with your strengths and expand the footprint of the go-to-market stack in the SMB.
Yeah,
Do you feel like they missed anything?
IPO'd at $1 billion, and now HubSpot's worth about $30 billion.
That's what I'm saying. Like, so they stayed put, bro. But there were whispers, more than whispers. Sounds like you were banging the gong in the boardroom. And do you feel like they missed anything?
No. I mean, now they kind of have to go up, or because you got the bigger. I don't know. Maybe they don't even, because now this AI thing's coming. So who knows, Cap? But because you just you can't rewind the clock and don't go into sales CRM, but go upstream. And is it $100 billion company? Probably not. I think it worked out pretty well for everyone.
Holy smokes, guys. You guys got to give me some takeaways, some blueprints, something here, because I'm listening to this. Now you just ended it with this HubSpot example of, well, hell, they didn't have to do it. So what advice are we giving our audience right now? What's the bottom line?
Okay. The bottom line is, if a lot of your business pattern recognition came, and your B2B software was defined in the last 15 years, the game has changed.
Yeah.
And you got to pay close attention to this, because we have been in a sustained technology context for 20 years.
Yeah.
And your corporate strategy, whether you're a founder or a big company CEO, needs to adjust to the macro reality of the next era of a disruption. Is that fair, Cap?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I think you had the cloud disruption, right? When you said the last 20 years. When you say the cloud was a major disruptor, though.
That was it. I think when you look at
other
B2B
than the
software,
cloud, you're right. Everything else was an N+1.
Yeah. I mean, social and mobile were huge for consumer tech, but not for B2B.
Yeah.
Like the category, when mobile came out, I was like, oh my God, I can reimagine the CRM. When cloud came out, yes. When AI comes out, yes, I can reimagine it. So it just differentiates, and it's just be aware of that. Like, if you're basing your strategy based on the last 15 years of history, I don't think it's right.
And we're putting AI on the same level, if not greater. I believe it's greater, same magnitude as cloud. Like, this is something's going to happen.
Some people are putting it on like the area of mobile. I think you're way underestimating it.
No way.
I think smart people are putting on the era of cloud. I think I have a lot of conviction around that.
Yeah.
And I think some people are putting it on the level of when we went from a nomadic society to a civilization. And I kind of think that's true too.
You've been reading some Yuval Noah Harari.
I know. I think so.
Love
beyond the scope of our pod here.
Yeah, but yeah. And at least my brain power, for sure.
Mark, would you mind staying with us? You've been so gracious. We love what you're doing at Stage 2 Capital. And Johnny and I are LPs there, and the value that you just create, the model that you have there is awesome. Would you mind kind of hanging out with us for the next, year or so as we try to navigate this conversation? Because I think this one is one that's going to continue. I think our audience is going to, I know I need help with it. Our audience is going to need help with kind of navigating some of the stuff around AI and in this innovator's dilemma. I thought this was awesome today.
It would be my pleasure. I've learned so much from the two of you, and it's really important that we all go back to like what we did in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s to kind of reflect on what's about to come. So that would be my pleasure.
Awesome.
Mark, you're a freaking superhero, dude. I love talking to you all the time.
It's amazing. What we haven't found a topic he can't talk about.
I know. Is there anything the guy can't do?
Holy smokes.
Anything? He's amazing. So
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you, Mark Roberge. Thank you, Mr. Cap. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.